People, nature, societies, economies, empires, nations, tribes, existence itself. Underlying all of it is the stuff of life. DNA, genetics.
So the current stage of genomics cannot be talked about without talking about disruptive technologies. The last time we had something like this happen was with the advent of the gas engine and when we started driving cars.
The world today is poised on the edge of a new frontier, at the very beginning of a revolution that begins and ends with our genes. The power of our genes is transforming everything.
We are now in the era of these disruptive technologies that can see and capture all kinds of data in an instant. And once that data is captured, it can be sent across the world by the internet to anybody, privately, surreptitiously, whatever you want to call it. It can just be basically robbed. It'd be like somebody going into your house in an invisibility cloak, taking your stuff, and then instantly sending it through a Star Trek transporter to the other side of the world. And you wouldn't have any idea what happened to it or who did it.
There have been decades of research in which outsiders will come into our communities and take our blood, and they'll take our data, and they will publish studies that are about us without actually asking us for any input in the process. Such that if you look just in the last 2 decades of biomedical research, there are tons of ethical controversies that have occurred related to that research.
Data sovereignty is one of the most important things there is. We have from 1492, if you want to go back that far, we have been exploited at every turn.
In the beginning, at first, we need some education because we just don't understand what it is that we have and why people want it. And like I said, we're so used to giving. They stole our land. We're so used to giving. We're so used to when somebody asks, we do whatever we can. We have giveaways where, we collect goods and then we give them to other people because that's how we show who we are. And traditionally, our people didn't have a lot of possessions. And, especially our chiefs were often the poorest person because if someone needed something, they gave it away. And so I think that, we need to stop and think about what we're doing. And, we really need some education.
The state of genomic collection in Native communities. So my example I use is basically the at-home, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, those genetic test kits. So what companies, these at-home genetic test kits want to do is they want to collect more self-identified tribal information. Thereby they can sell this as a product. So you can come home and, for fun, find out if you're what percent Cherokee, what percent Navajo, what percent Choctaw, and they're trying to find a way to commodify this and make money off of this. So the tribes themselves are not agreeing to this. They don't want their names to be used as a gimmick, essentially, because the value that these companies provide is relatively historical, tracing your ancestry, but in this case, it's not going to be medically useful. And so my assessment is what these genomic companies are trying to do is they're trying to siphon as much data as possible and then just find ways to basically mine it and exploit it in ways that the general public will just buy onto. And it doesn't provide benefit to those who've entrusted their data to these companies.
I'm not sure which phrase to use, space race, gold rush. Genomics is driving a lot of different industries people aren't very aware of. For example, in New Mexico, there was a case of a railroad that had genetically tested all of their employees for a carpal tunnel because that was a occupation-related injury. And by testing all of them unknowingly, they then also discreetly changed their insurance coverage policies based off of who was more genetically susceptible to developed these work-related injuries and who wasn't. Thankfully for that case specifically, the courts shut down on that because it was a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. But it drives all sorts of other industries, whether it's agriculture, whether it's pharmaceuticals, medical instruments, anything that you put into your body or interact closely with your body benefits from genomic research.
So the current state of data collection within genetics kind of globally is to sweep as much data as possible. So there's been a move to what's called broad consent, which is this idea that if you come in to participate in a study, instead of saying, well, we want to use your information for just this one purpose, we're actually going to put in the consent form that, well, we're going to use your information for whatever purpose we think is important down the road. That way it takes less of our time to come find you again. You don't have to go through the work of hypothetically signing another paper, and we can get to work on whatever we choose to in the future. So the information that's getting taken can be used for 100 different things, most of which you're never going to know that it's actually used for. There's continued movement in that direction. There's a concerning tendency towards different pharmaceutical companies getting involved in these games, where that genetic information can actually allow them to really make a lot of money off of you without you understanding that you are involved in a project that allows the company to develop new products that you end up paying for down the road when you need them as medicines. So with a move to broad consent, with this sweep of genetic information, there's never been a time where data has been more valuable. And so finding ways to be able to safeguard it such that it's being used consistently with the intended purpose of those that gave the information in the first place exists. People have talked about knowledge is power for millennia. We're kind of in this era of data is power. So if you can control the data, you have the power to influence people's lives, their decisions, and you gain access to other power structures to be able to influence them beyond that.
So the relationship between donors and the company, that's an interesting problem. A prime example is Henrietta Lacks. Her material, the cervical cells, have been used in science since they were gathered without her permission. And people have gained money and cells and research. They've gained all these things without actually giving any of the attributes back to her or her family. She's obviously dead now, but she should have benefited from that. It's like the syphilis trials in the South that were done on Black individuals. They basically left the whole entire population untreated for syphilis just to gain an idea of what syphilis would do. It kind of acts like copyright. You know, the money that they earn should be given back to the community in some way. There is a tenuous relationship between the people that donate and the people that actually get the credit and earn something from those samples.
There's such a steep learning curve about genomics, and you have to have the right people together that are equally diplomatic, equally scientific, and equally culturally grounded.
The Native Biodata Consortium is in one view a reaction to growing issues of inequity and unethical practices being established now in this genomics revolution. However, in perhaps the most pertinent view, the consortium is a model for the future, a way to give people protection and power against a coming storm. Native Biodata Consortium is a brand new kind of organization in the world, the first of its kind and the first genomics organization to be led by Native peoples. Native Biodata is an interface, a middleman between the unrelenting, indifferent greed of mainstream biotech companies and society's most vulnerable populations.
We aim to create a real consortium with Indigenous people, not only from the United States, but other places in the Americas and possibly even overseas in Australia and New Zealand. And the Native Biodata Consortium is a kind of legal and research safe house so that the data collected from Indigenous people can be leveraged to help Native people. Because the way research works today is that it's funded through public tax dollars of any federal government, and Indigenous people in that system basically become bioproperty of that particular nation, and they're not afforded their own sovereignty or autonomy over their own samples and their own data so that they can get to solutions quickly.
The types of research that we conduct are related to precision health, omics, which means like genomics, proteomics, metabolomics, anything that ends with an omics that's related to biology is under the umbrella of omics. And then also anything that could relate to human health.
Not only do we answer community-based questions, but also it solely revolves around that by having a community advisory board. So in a way, we're more of a, you could say we're more of a bio credit union.
To get this to work and to get all the tribes on board is really important because the counter narrative is that we're all human, and we are. Doesn't matter what spirituality or religion, they all say the same thing, we're all humans. But that's not how it actually works when you're talking about economics, voting, corporations, schooling, a whole bunch of other things. So we are all human, and genetics technically belongs to everybody, but the reality on the ground is that those things will be divided, or likely divided, the way they've always been divided, where we get all of this and you get this little bit over here.
Technology and those that are involved in their world out there of taking and using and patenting and selling, they're not wasting any time. They're on the move.
And so this data that we're collecting, these genetic data that we're collecting, and this microbiome, whatever data it might be with the flora, the fauna, with ourselves, or whatever it might be we're collecting, there's somebody that's going to, if they get a hold of that, they'll find a way to make money. That's what capitalism is about. What is one of the first things they start thinking about? How can we weaponize this? How can we make money off that? And we don't want that, our data, to be somebody's goose that laid the golden egg. If there's any money to be made off it, and that's not our goal here, if there's any money to be made off it, that money should be ours because it belongs to us, the data belongs to us.
Since the field is relatively new, we're able to get Indian country in on the ground floor and have access to some of these technologies that rival some of the larger research institutions that you would find in a university or a large corporation. And there is value in the unknown part of what genetics is. We don't necessarily know what that value is yet. It could be something like a cure to cancer. It could be something that causes us to be able to grow a crop better and more efficiently so that we can feed more people. It could be anything like that. We don't know right now, and even the large research institutions don't know a lot of it. So it's important that we look. I mean, if humans are anything, they're explorers. This is another realm of the universe that they are looking to explore. We want to colonize Mars. We want to put people on other planets, do that type of thing. But we also want to understand us better and what makes us us.
The way the industry practices data collection now, regular people don't have an opportunity to input anything more than an initial biological sample. They don't have a say as to what happens to that sample. Companies don't have an incentive to share test results, to share new therapies or drug developments, or any innovations developed from participant samples with the participants themselves. These genomics companies present paperwork to participants that allow for those companies to use samples indefinitely, in study after study producing lots of high-value research, which means billions of dollars in revenue. Nothing comes back to the participants of these studies, and Native America, among the most vulnerable populations, are especially left in the dark. Genomics companies interact with people as if this is normal and acceptable. Exploitation is a standard operating procedure. It is unsustainable. What native biodata brings to the table is the tools to educate participants, to advocate for their rights, to anonymize their identities if necessary, and to make sure a pathway exists where study participants get something tangible back for their participation. Native biodata is a model for the entire genomics world, showcasing a way to do science ethically without exploitation. Native biodata operates with a community-first philosophy. The Native America reservation system consists of 326 individual reservations, containing 574 federally recognized domestic dependent nations of people. The reservations were created as a bastion against the invasion of immigrant peoples that have flooded into North America over the last several centuries. As the reservation system has evolved, it has taken on a legal autonomy that allows for this part of America to be a perfect testing ground for a new kind of ethical genomics data protection.
Now, the New York Times picked up a story in which a researcher went back to some indigenous peoples in the Amazon area. And this group had been notified that their samples were being sold via the Coriell Cell Repository for $75 a vial to researchers. Now, this is a model that, researchers take for granted for advancing research. But for the communities, from their perspectives, they were promised medicines that help their people, not, several decades from now, but, within the next few years. And for them to find out that their samples were being used for profit, that money was being made off of their blood, they just felt so disenfranchised and disheartened.
For the longest time, things have been done to us or for us. Not too often have they been done by us or with us. And the work that we're doing now at the Biodata Consortium is important because a large part of it deals with things like genomics, with things like microbiome research, things that aren't too well studied yet. And it gives us the ability of getting in on the ground floor and staking a claim, for lack of a better term, to some of those technologies and some of those ideas so that they can circulate a couple of times here in this community before they go off into the greater community. If you think of it in terms of a dollar, when you buy local, when you shop in your own hometown instead of at some conglomerate like Walmart or Kmart, when you spend the money in a local institution, they spend money in the community as well. When we spend money at Walmart, it goes to Walmart. They spend it wherever they want, but they don't ever spend it in a community like mine because there's no Walmart here. We kind of have that same idea with respect to what's going on in research. When the large research institutions in the world are the ones doing it, they extract this data and this information and this tissue and they work it somewhere else, and then they make decisions on how it should be used. They make decisions on how that use is approved, and very rarely does anything come back to the people from which the data and the tissue was extracted. We want to try to localize that process, and we don't want to extract, we want to borrow these things with the idea that we are going to pay back as much as we can in the form of information, in the form of dosage recommendations to a greater health organization, in the form of publications that can bring further research and more money into the community based on those publications. We want to, as much as possible, localize that process so that it can be done by us and with us.
We are using the limited autonomy of domestic dependent nations in the United States, their geographic boundary and their legal jurisdiction, to protect the samples and claim some sort of ownership over those samples and data.
So part of what we would like to do is help work with communities so that we can really have these large and robust data sets that really get to the bottom of why do disease conditions fundamentally persist at higher prevalences in our communities. And maybe they don't, but we need the data to find out. And we need to create the data trusts in order to create these data sets to interrogate these much better questions than what science is doing right now.
So the consortium, from my understanding, it stores the actual physical samples. It helps communicate with the community to get community involvement. For example, my research project at OSU pertains to the Lakota and rheumatoid arthritis, and I'm looking at their gut microbiome. So Native Bio kind of acts like the middleman between me and the people of Cheyenne River, while having Cheyenne River people still active within the research. So it's yet again another layer of protection, but it's also ensuring that the projects go where they want them to go and not just me doing things willy-nilly. They need to agree with everything that I look at. Like, for example, I'm looking at fecal samples, and even though it's waste, it still has human genetic material in there. I remove all human genetic material because I don't have an agreement with Native Bio to actually study the human genetics, only the microbiology that exists within their guts. They needed to understand why I was doing it, and then they needed to be willing to contribute to the study. So that gives them informed consent on who, what, when, why. It also empowers them to decide, hey, I would really like to know what's going on and why we are having this higher incidence of rheumatoid arthritis, and I want to participate in the study. And then they donate their sample, and then once the analyses are done, they will get the genomic data back, and it will be stored. That computational data will be stored here, so if they want to do further research, they can, and then they will get the benefits of what my analysis says. So overall, it's me doing something for them and then empowering them to make decisions or get better treatments or make decisions about life.
We're so busy working to keep ourselves alive all the time, and there's so many more things that are more important than what happens to our data. And so things like that wind up just falling by the wayside. We're trying to keep our kids fed, we're trying to keep gas in our car, and so it really is comforting to me to know that there's an organization on our reservation that is looking out for us in that way.
The historical and continued exploitation and suppression of Native America make the people of this part of America more keenly aware of the type of profiteering in which modern genomics companies are engaged. That experience makes Native America the perfect segment of society to illustrate a way forward for mainstream America that is equitable, ethical, and just.
One of the main goals is to live up to the Consortium label, is to get tribes in this region all pulling in the same direction, all thinking on the same page, and hopefully all storing their samples and data with us. Because the problem with the way it's not even the problem with genetics, it's the problem with kind of US European mentality is that individual rights and property rule the day. Group concerns or group rights don't exist. And so say the 9 tribes here in South Dakota, one of them says no, they can just go down the road to another tribe and get the same information. So we have to build these regional consortia so that that doesn't happen.
For far too long, Indigenous peoples haven't had a seat at the table. And we don't want just a seat at the table. We want a voice at the table. And we want that voice to be empowered. And that's why we're really glad that we have so much interest in people wanting to work with NBDC.
We're doing for ourselves. And the answers to our problems are within our own people. Because what we have is a special connection. We have a connection to all of those ancestors that have gone before us. And the answers to many of our problems, we just need to, through our ceremonies, whether they're Lakota ceremonies, our Anishinaabe ceremonies, our Dene ceremonies, our Apache ceremonies, we just need to go back to those traditional ceremonies because they are our cloud. Google, Apple has a cloud. Well, they're our cloud. The information we need to cure a lot of our problems are in the clouds, meaning our grandfathers and grandmothers that went before us.
It's my hope that in the future, the Native Biodata Consortium will provide us with storage capacity and research opportunities and ways that will actually impact our lives here on the reservation, not, make somebody's PhD or whatever people are doing with our data, that data will actually be something that will come here and benefit us.
30 years from now, if I were to close my eyes and try to see what the future would look like, it wouldn't just be us. There would be some form of what we're doing in every area that is socially disadvantaged, starting with, for me, because of where I come from, Indian country. We would like to work with as many of those groups of people as possible until such time as they're ready to work on their own foundation. We want to be that foundation for them.
20, 30 years down the road, if the NBDC is successful, and I foresee that we will be, we will have basically just safeguarded the Native American genome. And this is really important to me because this is my family, my son, I just had a son, and this is going to directly impact him. These are his genes that people are trying to exploit. And if we can find a way to create beneficial research that will just not impact him but his tribe, I will be thrilled. I'll be thrilled that we've done good job and good work.
There's going to become a time, I believe, that in order to keep who we are as indigenous to this land where we are, it's going to all, because of the way technology and everything's going, it's going to depend on how much we know enough to safeguard who we are.
What native biodata offers is not just a mechanism to ensure the Lakota people a stake in the science of genomics, but a model for Native America and mainstream U.S. society to follow. An equitable, just way for everyone to realize the dreams of our collective scientific future. The genomics revolution promises to transform the human world. Let's make sure all of humanity has input on the direction of that transformation.
I've always been in the struggle for clean water, clean air, save our land, and here we have this, save our DNA. To me, it's just as important. Save the people. That's who we are.